All right. Welcome back to I'll Read It Eventually. This evening, I'd like to talk about the book Them by former Congressman Ben Sasse. Them, subtitled Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal. There it is, the horrible glare. He also wrote, as you might be able to read right here, next to this horrible smudge, he also wrote a book called The Vanishing American Adult, which I've also read and is very good. Um, as I'll talk about at the end, probably better than this book. But that's because it seeks to address a problem that you might actually be able to solve. Whereas this one, not so much. Um, I really like Ben Sasse. Start by saying that Ben Sasse is great. He's no longer in Congress, unfortunately. But I once told my brother that really what we need in Congress is just a couple hundred Ben Sasses and people like him. He is a guy who's willing to work across the aisle. He's somebody who recognizes that you don't have to agree with somebody on every possible point in order to get something done, and that ultimately, even if you're making life better for people with whom you disagree, you're still making life better for people who deserve to have life made better for them. Um, because, as he's going to say in this book, we're all Americans, and so his goal really, like many people who I think go to Congress, his goal genuinely is to serve all of his constituents and ultimately to serve Americans. I think that's really laudable. He's also very well read, really intelligent guy. He's a historian by trade, which makes him near and dear to my heart. My undergraduate degree, one of my undergraduate degrees, was in history, so love that. Um, but um, one of the reasons why I wanted to read this book now and why I read The Vanishing American Adult last year is actually because Ben Sasse recently said on social media that he had been diagnosed with like stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Um, and so he is, I mean, now he's probably got like 2 or 3 months to live. Um, yeah, he is not long for this world, unfortunately, which is a real shame. Not just because of it's a sad thing, but because um, I think America needs more civic and political leaders like him. And so for him to pass at a relatively young age, I think he's in his 50s, so he's not old at all, is really sad. Um, but just a note, and I'll actually talk about the book. I think he has done a really good job of facing death well. Um, he's not afraid. He has been loudly trumpeting the fact that he's going to pass. He has said things that need to be said regarding death, but then he's essentially said, you know what, I've got time, and I'm going to continue to say the things that I think need to be said, and I'm going to spend time with the people that I love, and that's really all that matters. And so, um, yeah, he's a great guy, and it's deeply sad that he's gonna leave us as soon as he is. So, um, no way he ever sees this video. But Mr. Sass, if you ever do see this video, very sorry, and thanks for writing this great book. Speaking of this book, again, it's called "Them: Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal." I think this book does a really good job on the first part, why we hate each other. Maybe not so much on the how to heal. Um, Sass says a lot of things in this book. I think many of them can effectively be boiled down to everything is not politics. Everything is not actually about politics. A lot of life might touch on politics or be impacted by politics, but everything's not actually politics. And we would be a lot better off if we remembered that and stopped thinking about everything in terms of red versus blue. Because that dichotomy, first of all, makes us hate each other, as he says, and then second of all, isn't actually real because it assumes that everybody fits into a very distinct red or a very distinct blue, and that's just not true. Um, Exhibit A. I don't really think that I fit into either of those camps very well, and don't identify myself as being within either of those camps particularly. So, um, yeah, he I think identifies the problem really well, speaks to that problem really well. He opens his book by talking about basically the reasons that Americans are losing meaning, um, why it is that politics has sort of become this overarching structure of meaning for people. And one of the things he said is that there's an epidemic of loneliness and anxiety in this country. He quotes this incredible statistic, incredibly horrible statistic. Um, he's talking about loneliness, and he says men are especially at risk. One comprehensive study of 67,000 American men found that bachelors under the age of 45 were far more likely to die in a given year than their married male peers. Just being a bachelor under 45 means that you're substantially more likely to die than other men. Um, that makes a lot of intuitive sense to me, being married. Um, the other day, somebody was telling me, this is a tangent, but the other day, somebody was telling me that an average size light bulb, and do not try this, an average size light bulb is shaped in such a way that you could, if you open your mouth wide enough, you could fit it into your mouth, but then it is shaped in such a way that you wouldn't actually be able to get it back out. And the guy who told me that said, there's a small part of me, and he's a bachelor, there's a small part of me that wants to try it. And I was like, 10 years ago, a small part of me would have wanted to try that too. Now, no way. So it makes sense. Um, but this is something we've been hearing about, this idea that there are lonely people, anxious people, that American society is kind of coming apart at the seams. There's been a lot of, I mean, for a decade now, longer. There's been talk of deaths of despair growing in this country. Um, the opioid crisis and people taking their own lives, and an epidemic of that and all sorts of stuff. And he addresses some of that in here, which again, I think he diagnoses the problem pretty well. He quotes, as I think everybody who talks about this has to, he quotes Robert Putnam, who quite famously wrote the book Bowling Alone, which was about the sort of disintegration of civic organizations. That there are plenty of people going bowling, but there are very few people bowling in leagues, and other things like that. And I've seen, um, just as a piece of anecdata, um, I was in Boy Scouts, and when I was in the troop that I was in, there were something like 45, 50 boys, of a variety of ages in that troop. And that was in the early 2000s and into, well, yeah, basically the first decade of the 2000s. Um, Now, decade and some change after, that same troop, there are, I think it's 6 boys, um, and 3 of them are about to age out, and 3 of them are quite young, and you have to have 5 to have a troop. So, that civic organizations just kind of cease to exist, and it's something I've told people before, that Boy Scout troop is one of the reasons why I didn't turn into a much worse person than I am. It kept me on the straight and narrow when I didn't realize that I needed to be on the straight and narrow. Um, it guided me toward the gospel before I realized that I needed to be guided toward the gospel. So the fact that it's gone is not just like, oh, that's cool. That was a great thing that I was a part of, and we went rock climbing and set things on fire. No, like it gave me a sense of meaning. It taught me how to be a man. Um, and because it was in the context of both older boys and then really good scouting leaders, it wasn't just here's how you do this, but here's a person who's doing it that you can look at and follow and emulate. That's gone. And it's no wonder to me that this is something I hear a lot about, that there are thousands of men my age who still live at home. Ironically, this used to be my childhood home, but my parents don't live here anymore. They still live at home with their parents. They are not employed or only partially employed. They're not married, and they have no real life plans. Yeah, I mean, if organizations like Boy Scouts and similar things of a similar nature cease to exist at large, then yeah, you're going to get a bunch of men, and I assume there's a similar thing happening for women. You're going to get a bunch of men who have no idea what they want to do with themselves. Um, because nobody's ever given them the sense that, like, hey, you know that nagging thought in the back of your head that, like, you know what? I'm a dude. Dudes want to go die in a war. There's something to that. You should, like, pursue that, but in a healthy way, not the go die in a war way. Although some people, obviously, post 9/11 wars did. But, like, there's a fundamental male thing, and I assume there's a fundamental female thing, which is not being spoken to by the nature of our contemporary culture, and it's producing a bunch of people who are essentially stunted in their growth. So he doesn't get quite as much into that, but he speaks to it, and I think everything he said, I was jiving with. I was like, "Yep, that sounds right." He also mentions, speaking about work, that Americans want to have meaning in their work, and the people who report having meaning in their work are substantially fewer than they used to be, which I buy. Um, American culture, I think, is sort of beholden to this materialism, and it's about getting ahead. It's about money. It's about the rat race. And I'm actually reading another book about that right now, which you'll be hearing about soon. Um, but it's about the rat race, and that ultimately leads to a total lack of meaning because one day you're gonna wake up and realize that, like, you know what, I can buy a lot of stuff with money, but it doesn't actually make me happy. Um, what is it, like 70 some percent of lottery winners go bankrupt within 2 years. Um, and then the percentage of their neighbors, their next door neighbors, who go bankrupt in the same time period is even higher because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. It's like, how could you not be happy with $150 million? Well, then you realize all the stuff that you could have, but you can't have or don't have. It's like that. This is gonna date me. It's like that VeggieTales, Madame Blueberry, where the corporation comes in and they build a stuff mart just down the road from her house, and some salesmen come and they're like, "Hey, you need some stuff," and she's like, "You're right. That is what is missing in my life." She goes, she's just filling up cart after cart after cart after cart after cart, sending it all to her house, and eventually bit of a heavy-handed metaphor, but eventually, like, all this stuff goes up the elevator into her house, and her house gets so heavy that it leans over backwards, and everything falls out the back of her house into a lake, and then her house, flips back here, and everything's gone. Her house is empty, and that's when this cute little asparagus girl goes, "Because a thankful heart is a happy heart. I'm glad for what I have. That's an easy way to start." It's great. It's a great show. My daughter sings that song all the time. It's incredible. But anyway, stuff doesn't give us meaning, and he speaks to that as well. Um, but then Sass goes into what I think is probably the primary problem because, again, the book's called Them, and he addresses the fact that as these civic organizations disappear, as meaning in our work disappears, as basically there's no structure to give meaning to life, and he includes churches in there, right? The church attendance is cratering, and that's been in the news a lot recently. So, but anyway, he says effectively the thing which has taken the place of all those other things is politics. That is the one sort of remaining meaning-making structure in American life that, instead of getting smaller and having less power over people, is getting larger and gaining power over people. He's got a whole chapter where he kind of lays some of that at the feet of the media. Um, this book was written, is it 2018, I think? So some of his examples are a little dated. Yeah, 2018. So some of his examples are a little dated. He mentions one of his prime examples of media bias is something from 2012 when Mitt Romney was running for president. And I actually remember the event, but that's just because I watched the debate that he was talking about. Um, but there was a moderator who corrected Romney on a factual point, and said, "Oh, actually, Senator Romney, you're incorrect about that," and he wasn't. Right? He was actually correct, and that got corrected later. But in the moment when he was like pressing Barack Obama on something, and he was like nailing him with it, like it was a good point, the moderator stepped in and like carried some water for the Democratic side of the debate. And Sass's basic point there is not. He says it's like 100 times. His point there is not, well, the left wing media is ruining everything for the right wing people who are the good people. No, he says there are good people on both sides of the political spectrum. They're trying to do what they think is right. The problem is that the way the media is structured now, effectively, it's not any longer structured to find the truth, right? It's structured, and this is both true of both right and left wing media, it is structured to speak to an existing tribe, right? And to cater to its wants, needs, desires, and preconceived ideas. Think here of things like Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left. Um, you're not going to hear counter narratives on those two networks unless it's a straw man that can be easily knocked out the window with a baseball bat, right? And that's because the audience is there, maybe not consciously, but the audiences there are looking to be told things that they already believe or things that they can already fit into a structure of meaning that they've already created for themselves. Um, and he says that began the 90s at least. And it's just gotten worse over time, right? Because if you want to sell newspapers, you got to write things people want to read. Well, right now, the only thing people want to read is the other guys are bad and you're good, and you should keep being good by believing all the things you already believe and believing them even harder, right? Um, and so, media is there for eyeballs and money. And he brings up a couple examples of people who he says are essentially just bad actors in the media, people who don't believe the things that they're saying on their shows, um, or people who say things that they know to be misleading or even untrue, but they know that it will get them money, right? He uses the example, is it Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity? I'm never going to be able to find it, but he uses the example of a right wing talk show personality. I think it's Sean Hannity, who at one point supported him, and then he said something. I don't remember. Sass made a point because he was in Congress at the time. He made some point. Hannity turned on him, right? And when he talked to him later, he was like, "Oh, well, it's just I had to because it's what my audience expected, and I'm here to serve my audience, and they wanted me to turn on you because I'd already told them, X, Y, and Z were true, and then you said Z was actually false, and so I had to do it." And it wasn't because the person actually believed that Sass had done something wrong. It's because he was serving a an audience who wanted to be told that their preconceived ideas were correct. And so none of this none of this should be surprising. If you've been paying attention to politics at all in the last 20 years, which is really the only time I've been paying attention to politics because it's the only time I haven't been a child, a literal child, then all this should be really familiar. He introduces this idea, though, which I think is really interesting. It used to be the case that people looked at the American electorate and they saw what he calls a one hump model, which would be like that, right? That's not a really good one hump, but essentially, if that's the middle ground politically, you're trying to get people onto your side. And so you're speaking to a middle and you're trying to pull them to you. And whoever in a political race gets the most people, they win. But he says, actually, what you're beginning to see is a two hump model, right? Where there are two very distinct camps that already exist. And you're not trying to change people's minds anymore. You're just trying to get your people to vote for you again. And you're trying to get them to tell their family to vote. for you, and the rest of it doesn't matter. Um, and as sad as it sounds, I think realistically that's probably true. Um, and so Sass has a lot to say about this, but ultimately I think he comes down on the point that many people, both in the media and in the business of professional politics, and really people in technology generally, people making social media, people making AI, I would add, although he doesn't really talk about that in this book, they don't have the best interests of other people at heart. They might say that they have the best interests of some broad grouping, so Republicans, Americans, humanity at heart. I mean, listen to Mark Zuckerberg reveal anything that Meta makes. Like, this is going to be great for humanity. But none of those people seem to be stopping to think, is this going to be good for my neighbor? And Sass, because he's an evangelical Christian, Sass, when he thinks of my neighbor, he's thinking of everyone. And he's saying, are these things going to be good for people, individual people, not my guys or them? But is it good for, like my neighbor who's next door right now? Is it good for, my family members in the parts of my house? Like, is it going to be good for other people, real people, not some tribe that exists in my head or writ large, but people? Um, People in the business of professional politics, professional media, I think he's going to charitably say a lot of them are misguided. Some of them are just out for money. A lot of them are misguided. But ultimately, they're interested in some sort of big picture that doesn't relate to individual reality on the ground. And that's why you have this 2-hump model, right? Where some people are over here and some people are over here because that's the structure of meaning that exists, and it's one of the only ones that still exists. People have allowed politics to replace everything else that used to give their lives meaning. I can't remember if it's in this book or if I heard it somewhere else. I think it was in this book, but he talked about the fact that there are people who um, watch like 48 hours of cable news a week. He said retired people watch 48 hours of cable news a week. Those who, on average. That's more than a full time job of watching cable. No wonder that all they can think about is politics. And no wonder that they are super convinced that their guy or their side is correct. So, yeah, again, none of that should come as a surprise. I don't even think you really have to read Sass's book to know those things. Um, the thrust, though, of his argument is, in about half the book, is the second bit, how to heal. Um, Unfortunately, because I really like him, I really like his writing. I love the way that he carries himself in public office. Unfortunately, I really don't think that this part of the book um, hit the ball out of the park for me. He begins by saying basically we need to recognize that we're all Americans. Um, not, I wasn't super impressed by that. As a sort of silver bullet. Like, yeah, sure, we're all Americans. But one of the things that has become really apparent over the last 8 or 9 years is just that that word doesn't have a shared meaning any longer. One of the things that has become really apparent is that Americans have lost a common mythology. Um, it used to be the case that you could basically say, yeah, we as Americans, we know where we came from, we know who we are. And even for somebody who had been outside of that identifier, Americans, for a long time, they could be like, oh yeah, I know the story you're talking about, right? This is the rise from, you know, rise from the founding era, where, the founders say that all men are created equal and men are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And the American story is essentially just expanding that to more and more and more people over time. And so, like, yeah, there's a point where African Americans are not recognized as even being people, and certainly not as Americans. But dang it, we solved that one. We emancipated the slaves. We fought the Civil War. We ended the system of slavery. And, when that wasn't enough, civil rights movement, right? And so there's this movement of progress, and that used to be the common mythology for Americans. That was who we were. And so when you talked about American history, you could at one point acknowledge, like, yeah, there was really bad stuff in our history. And at the same time say, but we are going to move forward. We're going to acknowledge that we did something wrong. We're going to make up for it. We're going to fix it. And we're going to do better in the future. Right. And those people who were left out in the cold, they're now going to be a part of who we are as Americans. They're with us and we're going to go forward together. That doesn't exist anymore. Um, and I don't lay this at the feet of the 1619 Project, but the 1619 Project is a great example of this, where the whole idea behind that historiographical movement is to reframe all of American history. And instead of saying, hey, this is a movement that started from a flawed premise but went forward to progress, it was America started in evil, it persisted in evil, and it's still evil now. Even though it seems like it changed on the outside, on the inside, it's still just fundamentally evil. Those don't work together, right? Like you can't have both of those things be true at the same time. And so there is a loss of a common mythology. And you can't simply say to somebody now, well, hey, we're both Americans, because what they think that means and what I think that means are totally different. That might have been more feasible in 2018, because again, this book is from 2018. So 8 or 9 years ago, might have been more feasible then. But to me, hey, let's just recognize our commonalities. Most people would say that they don't have commonalities with people in another political party. They're the bad guys. They're fundamentally evil. There's a crazy statistic out there about how many people in one political party would say that people in the other are evil. Not just wrong or misguided, but evil. It's terrible. The second thing he brings up is tech limits, right? He says we need to get off of social media. We need to put our phones down. We need to live in the real world. We need to talk to real people. 100%. I'm not on social media anymore. And I try really not to spend a lot of time on technology, oddly enough, as I, record my YouTube video. But really, I really do think that he's correct there. That one of the best things you can do is limit the amount of time you spend using technology, digital technology specifically, and especially the amount of time you spend on something like social media. I said earlier, the people who build those things, and I tell my students this all the time, the people who build those things do not have your best interests at heart. They do not care about people. They don't. Because most of those big social media companies employ someone who is a specialist in the science of addiction. And basically what that person's job is to take the science of addiction and apply it to the engineering structures that make the app work. What happens when you hit like on a tweet? Does it buzz? What does the little heart do? When you retweet something, how's that look? And how does it make your brain feel? Does it shoot off endorphins? Because if it does, we want to do that more, right? Even if the thing you're sending is like, hey, you commie, go die. Well, you shouldn't get good feelings from that. That's bad, right? You don't want to say that to a stranger on the internet. That's bad. And yet, for the people who run Twitter, it's good, right? Hey, do that. More engagement, more people seeing the ads on our platform, more time spent on our platform, more likelihood that you will pay to use our platform. Again, they don't have your best interests at heart. People who run social media companies do not have your best interests at heart. They aren't making those things for people. They're making those things for bank accounts. They want to make money, and they want to make it off of you and your time and making you dislike other people. That is what sells on social media. So get off of social media. Just get out. Yeah, I a couple years ago for Lent gave up Twitter, and that started a long process of eventually just cutting it off and saying, nope, no more, not doing that. Um, I deleted it from my phone and then reinstalled it and deleted it from my phone probably 3 times. And it's currently deleted, thank God. And it's just a time suck and does not help anyone. Doesn't produce anything. Doesn't make the world a better place. I'm not sure there's a single thing that's ever happened on Twitter that made the world a better place. So social media is bad. And tech limits generally good. The last thing that he says, and he really spends 2 chapters on this, but his idea is essentially you need to get grounded. Um, in order to feel like there is a common idea of what it means to be an American, Americans need to get plugged in somewhere and have their being plugged in not be based on their political identity. Um, and I think this is spot on, right? There is, like, good, you can see it right up there. That's a map of Kentucky, right? Weep no more, my lady, my old Kentucky home. Um, I love where I live. I've told people before, and it's a really weird thing to say in conversation. If you like somebody asks you like, "Oh, where are you from?" I go, "Kentucky, the best state in the union." And sometimes people are really thrown off by that. They're like, oh, okay, but that's weird. Um, but I believe it, right? And I have traveled out of state, traveled out of country, and then come back, and the sight of those rolling hills in the bluegrass as I'm flying back in to Lexington Airport, there's nothing like it. I love the place that I live, and I hope really never to move far away from here. And I work in a place that is really small, tight knit community. And I tell my students all the time, hey, one of the things you guys got to do when you leave here, you got to be committed and love the local church, right? It is a place where you know people, where you are known by people, where you can be supported. If you're religious, obviously, you can be prayed for, and that has meaning to you. Um, those things matter a lot. Um, my parents are in a small group. They've been in the same small group for 40 years at this point. Um, they are such good friends with the people in that small group that I'm friends with people in that small group, or at least very friendly acquaintances with people in that small group. And they're people my parents' age. But it's because I've been around them my entire life, and they are a part of this tight knit community that helps me make sense of who I am and where I am and what I am. Americans need that, and a lot of people simply don't have it. And so I 100% agree with him there that it's about getting grounded, right? He talks about in this book that he and his wife, when they began thinking about having kids, they wanted to move to a place where they could find that, and they moved back to his hometown in Nebraska, and that community, that sense of tight knit community that he'd experienced as a child, was just gone, right? It just had disappeared in the time that he'd been gone, and he didn't know how to bring it back. And you can't manufacture it. That's the thing. That's why it's so bad when something like a scout troop winks out of existence, or a church closes, or even like a high school shuts down and gets folded into another school. There's so many intangible pieces of community, so many little, what he quotes Edmund Burke at the end of this book, what Edmund Burke would call a little platoon of society. They just cease to be, and you can't recreate them, right? You can't just grab a bunch of people and shove them together and be like, all right, community. No, that's not how it works. Um, I saw a statistic the other day that said that um, it takes a small group, a church small group, it takes 2 years for those people, for a meeting once a week, right? At least during the regular school year. It takes 2 years on average for those people to feel like your friends and to be a priority, right? To sit in your head as a priority. 2 years. People don't commit to things for that long, right? People will go and be like, I'm not really feeling this small group after 2 weeks and never come in. 2 years. So that is why it's so difficult now that everybody's sort of in this, oh, well, politics is the only thing that gives meaning to my life. It's going to be really difficult to break people out of that because it's going to require 2 years of saying, no, in fact, this other thing or these other 4 things give meaning my life, and you can't manufacture it, right? It has to be real, has to be based on actual relationships, and it takes time and effort. The internet, social media doesn't take any of that, right? I mean, for example, I literally just started a YouTube channel the other day, and it requires almost nothing from me except for me to talk to a screen and read books, which I was already doing. So, like, it does not require anything from me, right? This is not a piece of thick community in my life. It's something I enjoy, but it's not a piece of thick community in my life. My relationship with my family, on the other hand, long lasting, very real, sometimes very difficult because it involves other real people, right? This is not that. So, you got to get grounded. You got to get grounded, and you have to, he's going to say, get local. You got to be committed to the place where you live, which means you have to stay put, which for some Americans, fine. For others, that's going to be a real hard thing to do, right? Um, Obviously, a hard ask for college students. Stay put. Well, after 4 years, you're going to go somewhere else. So, everything he said, though, about this made me think of two things. Number one, made me think of the Benedict Doctrine by Dreher, where Dreher is sort of like, American culture is falling apart and it's godless and pagan, blah, 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 blah. So we just need to build monasteries to preserve Christian culture. It was a big book. Actually, I think around the same time as this. I'm going to have to look that up. I think it was around the same time as them. Um, I read that book, Benedict Option. You know, forget about American culture, just build monasteries and wait for the Dark Ages. I don't really jive with that on a broad level. But I do agree as far as he goes by saying, hey, we need thick community that actually matters. Yeah, sure, 100%. The other stuff, Roger is kind of a Looney Tune. But then in church today, the pastor quoted from The Lord of the Rings, specifically from the Return of the King, and he was quoting Gandalf, and Gandalf says, "It's not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule." Yeah, like you, politics gives you the sense, it's an overarching structure of meaning. It gives you the sense that you have control in the world. Right? That's what politics does. It's That's what it's for. It is to make you think I can rule whatever, my county, my state, my entire country. If my guy's in office, if my gal is in the state house, whatever. It's an illusion. It's fundamentally an illusion because every presidential election, somebody's guy or gal gets into the White House and then their policy priorities don't come to fruition. It's an illusion. It's not real. Politics matters. It's important. Some really big things get done at a national level. But most of the time, the sense of control that people get from politics is an illusion. It's a lie. It is seeking to do, through worldly means, what you should be seeking to realize by spiritual means, which is that actually you don't control almost anything at all. And politics, and obviously this is a very Christian view of this, but politics is an idol because it is something that you think holds ultimate power. And you're going to give your allegiance to it because it makes meaning of your world and it makes you feel like you're in control. Right? And the Bible is going to say very strongly, it is not national politics. It is not the kingship or the judgeship or any of that stuff that gives meaning or power. It's God, right? Daniel, the prophet Daniel, says of God in the book of Daniel, he changes times and seasons. He casts down kings and raises up kings. He does the same thing to kingdoms. He gives knowledge to the wise and wisdom to those who have understanding. He sees what's in the darkness. Like God is the one who gives meaning. God is the one who has power. And so if if you live in a society where most people don't have church as a meaning making structure in their lives, people are not broadly religious, then politics is going to start to look like a really good meaning making structure. And that's why you have a 2 home. That's why. That's what I would say. That's why. So, overall, good book. A little long. He gets a little verbose, but it was fun. The main problem that I see with it is just that I think it fails to get at the root of the problem. How do you actually bring people back from the place where they actually do hate the other guy? Saying you share commonalities isn't enough. That's not going to bring people back together. Especially, again, now that people think, oh, that guy's evil because he disagrees with me. And so you're left with what I think are the only two options, and you see this broadly in society, which would be number one, pick a side and dig in. There. Or just opt out entirely and wait. Politics is a meaning-making structure, and so people who are really engaged in politics will tell you, hey, this is the election to end all elections. If we don't win this time, they're going to take our country away from us, right? They're going to ruin X, Y, and Z. They're going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. They're going to take away our guns. They're going to let immigrants across the border. They're going to, whatever. I mean, pick your issue. Pick your thing. They're going to ruin it if we don't win this time. And then that never happens. And I think what we have to understand about politics, what we have to understand, is that we are talking about this very short period in American history where we've been hyperpolarized, right? Those sorts of things have happened before. There has been hyperpolarization before. The election of 1800, hyperpolarized. Hyperpolarized. The Jacksonian era in American politics, the 1820s and 30s, highly polarized. Highly polarized. Pre-Civil War, highly polarized. Okay? But there have also been periods where there wasn't polarization, right? Think post-World War II. Not a lot of polarization. Almost none, in fact. We are sitting in a period where we think this is the end-all be-all. Or some people think this is the end-all be-all. It is the end of the world. This is the end of the road. If we don't win now, they're going to put us in concentration camps. It's just not true. It's an illusion, as I said earlier. And so I think opting out of sort of this big two-camp thing is probably the way to go. Because eventually, tempers are going to cool. Something is going to happen. The logjam is going to break. The fever is going to break. And eventually, we're going to be looking at a totally different political landscape. And I don't know if it's going to take some foreign war or an economic collapse. I don't know if it's going to take, another thing like COVID. Something, though, will happen. And the rules of the game will shift completely. And I guarantee you, probably within my lifetime, within the next 20 years, we'll make a bet. Within the next 20 years, this hyperpolarization, gone. Guarantee it. I will bet all of you $5. So I got like $5 on the line. So ultimately, I think the real answer can find in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah is writing to the people who have been exiled from their homeland in Judah to the city of Babylon. And he says, seek the good of the city where you live. And he's talking about like a place that they think of as like the heart of godless paganism on earth. And he says, seek the good of the city. Plant gardens. Engage in business. Give your children in marriage to other people. Marry yourselves. Live your lives, in other words. Do the things that matter. Do the things which are good. Do the things which make for joy and meaning. Crucially, he does not say, find yourselves a new king, get a senate, pass some laws. He doesn't say any of that, right? He says, yeah, you're living in a totalizing monarchy where the guy at the top is like buddy-buddy with their god. Don't worry about politics, in other words. Do the things that make for life. Because this too shall pass, right? Babylon passes away. The political strata that we're in right now passes away. And so don't worry about it because it will change. this too shall pass. So, Them, Why We Hate Each Other, How to Heal by Ben Sasse. Pretty good. Not fantastic, but pretty good. On to the next one. I think that's all we got to say. Go read something. See you next time.